some issues with this report, I think beginning, as it happens, with its title, Coordinated Campaign of Interference, as was raised by my right honourable friend, the member for, wherever he's the member for, thank you. There is no evidence that it was coordinated, and I can speak on my own account, and I think I may get support from the whip on duty, and indeed from the 10 Downing Street press office if it were able to comment. I'm not very often coordinated with the official line to take. Indeed, I've always thought that it is politically rather important that members should be independent in what they say and in how they vote, and therefore to make an assertion of coordination without evidence is a problem with this report. But it's not the only problem with this report. I would question footnote 1 on the bona fides of this report. Footnote 1 says the Committee of Privileges is not able to initiate inquiries on its own initiative. But once matters are referred to the House, it has power to inquire not only into the matter of the particular complaint, but also into the facts surrounding and reasonably connected with the matter of the particular complaint, and into the principles of the law and customs of privilege that are concerned. Commons Journal, 1947 to 1948. However, that is surely superseded by the vote in 1978 on how privilege matters should be dealt with. If I may refer to Erskine May 1532, which sets out the procedure and explains why the procedure is as complex as it is. The procedure is designed to prevent frivolous complaints of breach of privilege. The following safeguards are in place. The Committee of Privileges does not have the power to inquire at will, but can only deal with complaints which are referred to it. Decisions on whether to refer a matter of privilege to the Committee of Privileges are taken by the House as a whole, and members require the permission of the Speaker to raise a matter of privilege. This was not done, and the 1947 Commons Journal entry was preferred to the 1978 motion. That seems to me to have been a mistake. This is not to say that this is necessarily not a serious matter, but the whole reason for the procedures is to ensure that only serious matters are subject to these reports. Why did the committee not follow the procedure properly set out by the House in 1978? Why were the safeguards ignored? This is before coming on to the matter that others have raised about individuals being named and referred to without any ability to answer. I'm not too worried about that. I've said things on the public record, and if people want to quote me and wish to refer to my television programme on GB News, which they may be jealous of, or whatever other concerns they may have, that's absolutely fine. I don't mind that personally. But I do mind that people say they're following the procedures of the House when the procedures actually seem to be rather different when you read Erskine May. I also think there is a modest discourtesy to the House of Lords, that the House of Lords has exclusive cognizance, and implied criticisms of peers are against the practice of this House. And I think that is unfortunate. This is unfortunate more from our point of view than from theirs. Why do we have this idea of exclusive cognizance so clearly in mind? It was because in the days of the Supreme Court being the House of Lords, ultimately membership of this House would have been determined by the other House, and therefore we have always jealously guarded our right of exclusive cognizance, but in return we have given it to their lordships. So I am concerned that this report has trespassed on that. Oh, it's been honour, delight, joy to give way.
Dame Angela Eagle.
Thank you. I thank him for giving way. He has referred to the Privileges Committee, and it's in this report, as a kangaroo court. He's also said that he thinks that it makes kangaroo courts look respectable. He also referred to the members of the Privileges Committee during the hearings that they had as marsupials. On reflection, might he like to get up and just apologise for that use of language now?
The lady very kindly leads me to what I was going to say next. I had absolutely no desire to impugn the integrity of individual members of the committee, some of whom I hold in very high regard. Of course I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
For giving way. Would he agree
or at least acknowledge that comments made by members named in this special report raised the risk significantly of harm to members of the committee to the extent that the Parliamentary Security Department felt it necessary to carry out an urgent review of the personal safety, constituency offices, constituency events and homes of the members of the Privileges Committee.
There are definitely issues that members of this House, many members of this House, have faced with security. I do not believe that criticising the actions of a committee has that effect. And if the honourable gentleman really takes that route, then we have to agree with each other the whole time. And admirable, though I thought the Leader of the House's request was that we should get on better, that I'm afraid was knocked for 6 by the Shadow Leader of the House in her rather cantankerous comments that followed. But I do want to make it clear that I have no intention to impugn the individual members of committee. I do indeed hold many of them in the highest regard. I served on the House of Commons Commission with the honourable gentleman, my honourable friend, the member for Broxbourne, and on the Privileges Committee under his chairmanship with the honourable lady, the member for Macclesfield. And I've always thought it is important to get on well with people and to be courteous to them, as the Lord President Council suggested, across the House. But that doesn't mean that one can't criticise them. And it was legitimate, and it is legitimate, to question the position of the chairman of the committee. And that must be something that we have to be clear about. But in the last debate, I quoted at some length from the House of Lords setting aside the Lord Hoffman judgment because of his association with Amnesty International. That made very clear that the question was the risk of the appearance of partiality. It did not question Lord Hoffman as a man of honour and integrity, and I certainly don't question the honour and integrity of the Right Honourable and Learned Lady, who is a most distinguished member of this House. But I don't think she was wise to serve as chairman of a committee when she had tweeted her views. We've just heard from the Shadow Leader about how shocking it is to tweet anything, but it's all right to tweet something when it prejudges a case you're about to hear. This, to me, seems to make no sense. And I would question this report further, and the Father of the House noted this in paragraph 8, sets out how you may question the committee, but in paragraph 15, footnote 10, it seems to object that I did exactly that in the debate that followed the report of the committee. I mean, the previous Prime Minister used to get accused of cakeism, but this seems to me to be an extreme level of cakeism. And the position of the chairman was fundamental because a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump, as it says in, I think, Galatians. Of course, take it away.
I'm listening with interest, although sometimes the precision could be greater. The reference of the matter of the Privileges Committee in the footnote was referring, I think, to Mr Johnson being referred to them, rather than this report, which followed for subsequent events. And I also read the footnote 10 on page 6, to which my right friend refers to, as explaining the answer to the question he'd raised over Hoffman, not supporting what he said about Hoffman. Was I wrong?
Well, I think, my honourable friend, what I was pointing out was that it seems from a reading of paragraph 15 that what I said is seen as being part of a sustained attempt to undermine and challenge the impartiality of the chair in the very debate where it says under paragraph 8 that we are actually allowed to make criticisms once the report has been brought to the House. So I think it is a very odd footnote at the very least, unclear in what it is trying to achieve. But the problem with the chairman's position was that undermined the whole committee, that undermined the validity of the committee, because it is well known that if a body comes to a conclusion with one person on it whose partiality is questionable, that whole process is then nullified and needs to start again. There is also, as we know, currently an investigation into my honourable friend, the member for Harwich and North Essex, but that was not known during the course of the committee's deliberations, and therefore nobody could raise that as a question of impugning his integrity until, as I understand it, the report was completed. They may have raised questions, there may be valid questions to raise, but they certainly weren't raised by me or by any others. And let's now delve into the details of the report, because the report bases its claims on privilege on Erskine May. But I have a nasty feeling that they have just read the headline of Erskine May without reading the relevant footnotes and examining the Commons journals to see what they refer to. I have done this with considerable help from the library and the journal office. So if we look at footnotes 5 and 6 of the report, they point to Erskine May, 25th edition, paragraph 15.14. Paragraph 15.14, Madam Deputy Speaker, has 35 further footnotes. And the House may be relieved to know that I'm not going to go through all of these because many of them are irrelevant to the report. They deal with matters such as assaulting members en route to Parliament, which is deemed a breach of privilege. Breach of privilege that seems to happen most days to some, but never mind, it's a breach of privilege of great antiquity that the committee seems unconcerned about. They deal with reflections on the Lord Chancellor or allegations of corruption. None of this applies, but some of them do apply. Notes 4, 7, 21, 22, 26 and 27 are worth looking at. Note 4, insulting or abusive language. Madam Deputy Speaker, the first example of insulting and abusive language quoted in this footnote comes from 1646. So we are making a claim for privilege based on a time when this House was at war. And what was it? The claim was that one Francis Godolphin, a turncoat, who had been ruling in the Isles of Scilly, should not in future be criticised because he was now supporting the House of Commons. So the House of Commons was protecting one of its own in a time of war. It seems to me hardly to be the greatest precedent for members of the committee not being able to withstand a little bit of criticism today. 1660, rudeness in the lobby. Somebody was rude, an outsider was rude to a member in the lobby, and members were very shocked by that. 1877, Dr. Canale was rude to another member in the lobby and was forced to apologise. And likewise, in 1887, Dr. Tanner was rude to another member in the lobby, and the motion of censure on that occasion was withdrawn. But there is a clear precedent, I accept, that we are not allowed to be rude to fellow members in the lobby. But I was very careful throughout this whole process, and had I done the other, there would have been grounds for complaint, not to talk to any members of the committee about what was in front of their committee. That seems to me to be improper and private lobbying that should not take place, and which I was careful, as I say, not to do, in spite of the fact that inevitably with the Conservative members there were one or two who I met on many occasions during this process. But that seems to me to be covered in broad terms by what is set out in footnote 4. If we come now to footnote 7. Footnote 7 is why I think they didn't bother reading the footnotes, because if it's not my proudest achievement in Parliament, I don't know what is. I've actually discovered a mistake in Erskine May. And I see the clerks at the table almost swooning with horror at this thought. And I thank the Commons Journal for pointing this out. It quotes the 1862-3 journal, and it is in fact the 1863-4 journal, when a Mr. Reid was summoned to apologise to the House for writing a rude letter to a Member of Parliament. Madam Deputy Speaker, what a pity the Privileges Committee hasn't got on to that. Just think how busy they'd be if they looked into every rude letter sent to a Member of Parliament by a constituent. Perhaps they should have done their rolling report with powers that they have accrued to themselves to do this. I might have one or two I could send in myself. One or two Remainers write to me in the most excoriating terms, but I'm afraid I've always taken that as part of the flotsam and jetsam of political life. If we go to 1890, Mr. Atkinson was suspended for 7 days, but Mr. Atkinson offended the Speaker, both on the floor of the House and in correspondence. Epistolary offence was given to Mr. Speaker, and that is a much more serious matter, surely, Madam Deputy Speaker, you would agree with this, than it is to argue with a member of a committee, or indeed even the chairman of a committee. In 1781, the wonderfully named Theophilus Swift was called to the bar and had to apologise for causing offence. And when a couple of duels were claimed by members against members, 1845, Mr. Summers, MP for Sligo, challenged Mr. Roebuck, the member for Bath, and in 1862, a rude letter was sent to Sir Robert Peel by the O'Donoghue, the MP for Tipperary. These were considered to be great breaches of privilege, though only apologies were required, no further sanction. And we have another challenge from Mr. Kelly, who apologised to Mr. McCohen for another duel. Then a Mr. France was admonished at the bar in 1874 for being rude about the chairman of a committee, but in 1968-9 it was deemed that criticising the impartiality of the chairman of a subcommittee was not contempt of Parliament when it was thought that the issue faced by the chairman of the said subcommittee was one where he had a constituency interest and therefore could not be impartial. So I would say, Madam Deputy Speaker, unlike me to be such a modernist, but the more modern precedent is on the side of being able to challenge the position of a chairman of a committee. In 1900, there was a letter written by a non-member about a select committee on government contracting being partial and was deemed a breach. This was deemed a breach and motions were put, but what did the House decide? The House decided not to vote in favour of the motion, nor on the amendment to the motion, but that it now proceed with the business of the day. Once again, the House, in recent centuries, let alone decades, has become less and less prissy about this type of privilege because it risks ridicule when it stands upon its honour in this way. So in 1901, some things never change, and indeed in 1926 there are arguments with the Daily Mail. And it was suggested that the editor of the Daily Mail be brought to the bar of the House, which I believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, is the gift of Jamaica. If we pull it out, which we're not meant to do because it usually has a sign on it when the House isn't sitting saying, please do not touch, but I will confess I have pulled it out, and it's very interesting to see. It then says the gift of Jamaica. So the editor of the Daily Mail was not caused. In 1901, what had he done? He'd said that had a Member of Parliament criticised him in the way he'd been criticised out of the House, he'd have sued for libel, and this was deemed to be threatening, but he was not called in. And perhaps my favourite case is from 1880. 1880 is a very interesting case because a certain Mr. Plimsoll puts out a leaflet to the electors of Westminster where he says that Sir Charles Russell, the Member of Parliament for Westminster, has used a parliamentary tactic to stop a vote on a bill. Now, some of us who come on Fridays, I look and catch the eye of my right honourable friend, the member for Christchurch, may think that using tactical efforts to stop bills is not such a bad thing altogether, but Mr. Plimsoll took offence at this and put out a rude leaflet. And this was brought to the attention of the House. And the House voted that, in the opinion of the House, the conduct of the honourable member for Derby in publishing printed placards denouncing the part taken by two honourable members of this House in the proceedings of the House was calculated to interfere with the due discharge of the duties of a member of the House and is a breach of its privileges. But this House, having regard to the withdrawal by the honourable member for Derby of the expression to which the honourable member for Westminster has drawn its attention, is of the opinion that no further action on its part is necessary. I wonder if you have worked out what bill this was that Mr. Plimsoll was bringing forward, for which he had to apologise to the House, a precedent quoted indirectly by this report, favourably. Mr. Plimsoll was trying to get a bill through to put the Plimsoll line on ships to save hundreds of lives. And this House criticised him for a breach of privilege. Madam Deputy Speaker, we should be very wary of standing on our dignity, because this House is the cockpit of freedom of speech. It is where democracy must run. And when we try and silence people because they say things that we do not like, we risk looking ridiculous.